As we get ready to discuss Chapter 14, it's a good place to review our Marketing 380 analysis techniques that we'll be using for the group project. As you remember from our earlier class discussions and the lab recently, you will see that we have a couple of very generic techniques that we would call the basic analyses, where we run frequency tables to check data for mistakes, also to get some insights into our sample profile as far as regarding what percentage of the sample might be male or female, how many people have done a certain activity, and it's primarily focused on the nominal or the ordinal data. With nominal data, remember, we're putting respondents into groups. Now, we also calculated means and looked at the average scores on various scale questions. It's important to note that with means, we only look at the scale data or some of the ordinal data if we'd like. So these are the basic analyses that we do in order to get started with our data analysis. We have already talked about the first two techniques here, ANOVAs and crosstabs, from Chapter 13. If you remember, ANOVAs were the technique where we compare a mean across groups, where we look at one nominal variable and one scale variable. For example, life satisfaction question by gender. What we'd be doing here is exploring if males or females have a higher or a lower life satisfaction score on average than the other gender. And we can test a hypothesis. Many of you in your groups have hypotheses that look like this. We've also talked a little bit about crosstabs, where we look at the relationship between two nominal variables. For example, tattoo by gender. This would be exploring whether or not males or females are more likely to have a tattoo or not have a tattoo. So any two nominal variables could be compared in a crosstab. The two techniques that we'll be exploring here in Chapter 14 relate to correlations and regressions. It's important to note that both of these techniques deal with scale questions only, and with correlations we look at the relationship between two scale questions where there's no causation. We just see these two variables moving in tandem or related somehow. For example, satisfaction with Chico and satisfaction with Chico State. We're not proposing that one causes the other, we're just saying that they're related. As one goes up, the other probably goes up. That would be a positive correlation example. The regression technique is where we look at the relationships, again, between scale variables, but here we have a dependent variable and one or more independent variables. And what we're saying with regressions is that the independent variables actually cause or influence the dependent variable. That's best illustrated with a couple of examples. If you think about your exam score on a class, saying, for example, that's your dependent variable, a scale question that would be a dependent variable. Some of the independent variables that we could look at is, for example, hours studying. You could say the number of hours that you study influences your exam score. I hope that makes sense. Of course, the more you study, the higher the exam score should be. In addition, there could be several variables that influence your exam score, such as hours studying, the hours of sleep the night before the exam, and the number of classes that you missed before the exam. All would influence your exam score. Each of these would be scale questions, and we're proposing that each of these variables would influence the exam score. And we could test to see whether they're all significant or some are more important than others. So that's what we'll be testing and talking about in Chapter 14, correlations and regressions. So at this point you're familiar, or hopefully familiar, with these four techniques and the two basic techniques as well.